Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and thank you all for coming along to this absolutely historic place. The Red Choir have been singing and are going to sing again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the lovely shirts you're wearing. And can we just say, because I think it would be appropriate, a big cheer in memory of the great Ray Davies, who did so much with your choir and so many other radical causes all across Wales. I was very sad when I couldn't go to the memorial event for Ray, and I understand it, as would be appropriate for Ray, it lasted about 5 hours. And that was the short version of it. But I first met Ray during the steel strike, then of course the miners' strike, Palestine and so many other causes. What a legend, what a great guy. Thank you very much for coming along today. We're at one level part of a campaign about the leadership of the Labour Party, and coming here today is something very special to me. This constituency was represented by Aneurin Bevan in Parliament, later by Michael Foot, later by Lou Smith and others that followed after that. Aueurin Bevan came from poverty, he came from struggle, he came from hope, he came from determination, he came from optimism, and because of his determination he became a minister in the post-war Labour government, which inherited a debt-to-income ratio of 250%. It didn't pursue a policy of austerity and cuts. It said the only way to rebuild post-war Britain was to rebuild it for the people, not for the bankers. And what he achieved as Minister of Health was quite incredible in many ways, because then the Ministry of Health was much more than just health. It was also housing, and it was a lot of other issues as well. And he faced lots and lots of very tough decisions. I'll give you an example of one of them. The housing crisis was obviously huge. At one level it had to be solved by taking over, requisitioning empty buildings, which was done by local authorities all over Britain. It was done by building prefabricated houses, turning the skills of those that had been making aircraft in a few weeks into making prefabricated homes. But there was also a question of building council houses. And he was given lots of options of how to build hundreds of thousands, if not millions of homes in a short period. And he was given options about how to do it quickly, how to do it cheaply, and he said, no, we will build good quality rooms with good sized bedrooms, good sized living rooms, and where we can we'll build them with gardens, and we will build those homes that will last. They will be the quality of homes that will last. You look all over Britain now, you see council housing that was built in the 20s, 30s and 40s that's still around. You see council housing that was built in the 60s and 70s but already demolishing because of the way it was constructed and the danger to people living there. So that was the sort of man he was, that he would take that principled decision about the quality of homes that he wanted people to live in. And then he was faced with the issue of the health service. Very difficult. He was absolutely determined to introduce the National Health Service. And he made it national for a reason. Because he didn't trust Conservative-controlled local authorities to deliver health care for all. He didn't trust the vagaries of the market to provide health care for all. He didn't want an insurance system which effectively kept health care private and the public part was the funding of it. And so he wanted and achieved a national health service, initially totally free at the point of use for everybody as a human right. And it's still there as a health service, free at the point of use as a human right. But he faced critics, he faced problems, he faced the medical profession, and he faced most of them down in order to get the NHS through. And when you read that initial NHS Act, that leaflet that was put through the door, every single door in the whole of the UK, on the day the National Health Service started, there's something that tingles down your back about the achievements of a government, despite all the problems and all the difficulties, was prepared to take that plunge of saying no longer will healthcare be the preserve of those that can afford it. No longer will hospital care be preserve of those that can afford it. It is there for all time for everybody. He also recognised the links between poverty and ill health, industrial pollution and ill health, water pollution and ill health, hence the connection with housing and all the other issues that he faced. But we now face an NHS in a very, very different time and a very, very different climate. Whilst the badge is there, the NHS badge is there, absolutely, and in Wales there is no internal market in the NHS, and well done the Welsh Government for ending the internal market in the National Health Service. That is a huge achievement. But in England and other parts of the UK, the internal market is absolutely there. And when I meet executives of my local hospitals, and I meet managers, you get into these absurd discussions where they talk in hushed voices about what the hospital down the road is thinking of doing, what the market opportunity is for this specialty, that specialty, or the other specialty. And you think this is a world of most unbelievable absurdity. Surely, we're all human beings, we can all get ill, we all need health care. Let's plan for those needs rather than opening it up to a market competition to see who can produce it the cheapest at the highest quantity at the lowest price. Surely we need health care of good quality, properly planned and available for all. There is no place in the principle of universal health care provision for all of an internal market where the competition is between a lot of highly profit-orientated private health companies. Let's reinstate our National Health Service, end the internal market, end the whole principle of the marketisation of our health care. Because what the Tories are trying to do, and sadly building on some of the stuff New Labour did, is to turn our NHS into a health service of last resort. So that if you can't afford to go anywhere else, you can't get anything else, you go to the NHS. In its extreme form, that ends up like the American emergency room, the only place you can go to if you need health care. And so we stand today in the midst of a difficult political time. A political time when we're told that the banking crisis of 2008, 9, 10 was the big problem, was caused by excessive public expenditure by that Labour government and has to be paid for by cuts to the very poorest and most vulnerable within our society. I reject the notion that we spent too much. I absolutely reject the notion the poorest in our society have got to pay the price for the excesses of the bankers and the lack of regulation of the banks at that time. And so the Labour Party has got some very tough decisions to make, and it's got to make them quickly, and it's got to decide in which direction we wish to go. I was in Parliament during that banking crisis. I supported the public ownership of the banks. It seemed to me the right thing to do. I supported the increase in benefits and pensions that happened briefly after the banking crisis because it put money into the economy. Quite simply because poor people spend money, rich people salt it away in tax havens. It's not complicated, it's basic economics. And we then moved into the 2010 election. I can remember like yesterday Alistair Darling, who was our Chancellor, saying, when we're elected there will be cuts greater and deeper than anything Margaret Thatcher managed. What kind of promise was that to the most vulnerable and poorest in our society? What kind of challenge was that to the unaccountable power of banks and great international corporations, that we have to bow down before them and make the very people who are the lifeblood of the labour and trade union movement suffer on the altar of the greed of the bankers at that time? And then we came forward in the last Parliament through to the 2015 election. Yes, there was great stuff in the manifesto, no question about that. And I worked flat out like many others to try and get a Labour government elected. We didn't succeed. But the problem was that in that in that election campaign, what we were being offered was actually another form of austerity. Austerity light may be, but austerity it still was. Local government expenditure was still going to be controlled and cut. Public sector jobs were going to be lost, and a wholly disproportionate number of public sector jobs have been lost all across Wales, particularly in the civil service. And we were going to be offered a process where we would move back into budget surplus and then decide what to do after that. I think we've got to think and do things differently. First of all, why do we exist as a party? Why do we exist as a trade union movement? What are we here for? We're here because we think there is gross inequality in our society. We're here because we want to see a different, a better, a more hopeful world. People like Nye, working in the most complicated and difficult times, saw that and had that vision and that inspiration. What has happened that we've lost that vision, lost that inspiration, lost that sense of purpose? And so, after the election, a number of us got together and thought, what do we do? I wanted there to be a real policy debate throughout the Labour movement. We didn't get that. Instead, we got a contest for leadership, and I was asked to put my name forward and have done so. And the response has been very interesting. Because we, and I say we, not me, we are standing up against the austerity budgets. We are standing up against what the government is doing in its budget, in its welfare reform so-called act, and in its trade union legislation, and saying there is a different agenda around. An agenda around that instead of moving an arbitrary date by which we achieve budget surplus, instead collects the 50 billion a year of uncollected tax that's salted away in tax havens or clever accounting all around the world. Instead, we have a national investment bank which invests in the infrastructure we need, the railways, the homes, the schools, the hospitals, and doesn't go down once again that arid road of private finance initiative, which is privatisation by another name, of schools and hospitals all over the UK. And we start investing in people, and we invest in looking to a future based on equality and opportunity, so that students in some parts of the UK don't leave university with £50,000 worth of debt. Instead, they leave with a degree, a qualification, a hope and an opportunity. All these things are actually possible, but it does mean we have to be true to our roots, true to where we've come from and true to where we're trying to go to. True in bringing about real equality and justice, and recognising, at the end of the day, all the great achievements any of us have ever experienced or benefited from, including bad microphones, including microphones that turn themselves off, including plugs that pull themselves out. I will shout. Can we get it working again? Hello? Oh, thank you very much. My voice isn't what it was. This is nearly the 70th event we've been to. I think the 66th event we've been to in 6 weeks, so please forgive my voice. And it's that sense of optimism that's there, built on the past. How we got the NHS, how we got council housing, how we got free education, how women got the right to vote, how we got the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, the Race Relations Act. All the great achievements didn't come around from the smartness of my colleagues sitting around a table in the House of Parliament. They came because of people on the ground everywhere, marching, demanding, defending. But what's different about this campaign, and I'll conclude with this thought, is that it isn't a campaign against things. All of us here have marched, I'm sure. All of us here have demonstrated, I'm sure. All of us have been here together in the steel strike, the miners' strike, and many, many other disputes against something. This is a campaign about bringing people together, and the numbers that are coming together are truly extraordinary. I'll give you one example. Last Saturday night in Leeds, we had to book the armouries, the big hall in the armouries, for our rally. More than 2,000 people came at very short notice to this big rally in the armouries, and I was looking at the crowd there, and we had brilliant speeches from students, from older people, from trade union reps. All sorts of people spoke at it, and I looked at that crowd. They were black, they were white, they were old, they were young, they were Hindu, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. They were every faith, every ethnicity, every age group, but they were brought together in a sense of common purpose, enthusiasm, and wanting to see a better and different society, where we unleash the talents of our young, where we don't allow people to sleep on the streets, we don't allow people to become homeless, we don't allow those with mental health conditions to have their lives destroyed. We instead look to a much more inclusive society. And when you bring people together, working together to achieve something, you don't end up blaming the latest minority. You don't end up using inhuman language towards refugees and asylum seekers and people who are desperate in their lives. Instead, you do something positive and humane and humanitarian. And that's what's exciting about this. I don't know what the result of this is going to be on September the 12th, and I'm making no predictions. But well, you might, but don't tell me yet. Make two quick points. A lot of people have said a lot of things that maybe at one point, sometime in the future, when they read them again, they'll maybe think twice about what they said. I do not make any personal remarks about anybody. We as a campaign do not respond to any personal attacks made by anybody in any way. Life is too short, life is too important, the issues are too important for that. And because our campaign will not respond to any of that, it forces the debate, even in some of the most unlikely circumstances in some newspapers, instead to reckon with the politics of austerity, to reckon with the politics of the welfare reform bill, to reckon with the politics of taking away trade union rights in the trade union so-called reform bill. So it's changed politics in that way. And it's very exciting because it's done that. Our party was founded by people with vision and bravery and hope and optimism. Our party ought to represent all of that and not be ashamed to say they're socialists, not to be ashamed of the trade union connection, not to be ashamed of what we're really about and the kind of world that we want to bring about and develop. And because we got into this election campaign with enormous difficulty, and I thank all those that sent social media messages to encourage Labour MPs to make a nomination, I'm very grateful to them, and in the fullness of time, every one of those MPs that nominated, I'm sure, will be equally grateful, even if they're finding it difficult to admit that at the present time. I'm sure they will come round to it. But it's exciting. It's bringing people together. It's showing us a great way forward. And what better place to do this in front of the symbol of Aneurin Bevan, a man who spoke to the people of Britain, spoke to the people of the world of what you could achieve. A community suffering from the coal owners and the landowners, suffering the grossest exploitation, suffering the grossest disfigurement of the natural environment, spoke up for a decent and better world. We learn from Nye. We learn from all those in the South Wales coalfields that suffered so grievously that the rest of us might have a Labour movement to be proud of. Let's once again be proud of our movement. Let's once again be proud of what we can achieve. Thank you very much for inviting me here today.